which allowed a 21-year-old man to hijack a Canadian charter plane and hold passengers and crew hostage for hours.
About 3.5 hours after the 174 hostages were released unharmed and the hijacker, Stephen Fray, was safely in custody, Mr. Golding faced the press along with Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper and members of the security forces. Nadine McLeod was there.
Tired from dealing with a major international crisis all night, it was a weary-looking and somber Bruce Golding who faced the media around 11 o'clock this morning. The crisis had ended with the best possible outcome. No one was hurt and the hijacker was in custody. But the question of how it happened in the first place remained to be answered. Mr. Golding said he has instructed the Transport Ministry to request an investigation from the Civil Aviation Authority and the Airports Authority.
I want to say again how relieved I am that we have been able to see an end, and a satisfactory end to this trauma. It would have marred the visit of Prime Minister Harper to Jamaica, something that I would not have wanted to happen. I have ordered an investigation into the circumstances under which the security arrangements at Sankster International Airport could have been breached. We have an unblemished record of airline safety and airport safety. We have never had anything of its kind in Jamaica before.
Beyond that, however, the Prime Minister did not want to give much more information about the incident. He said among the things the authorities will be probing is how Stephen Fray was able to barge through security checkpoints with a gun and enter the plane before anyone could stop him. Mr. Golding said while Stephen Fray was on the plane, he demanded to be taken to Cuba. The plane was destined for Halifax, Canada through Cuba. The Prime Minister commended the security forces for their successful response in storming the plane and disarming the hijacker.
They did so successfully, without a shot being fired, without anyone, including the offender himself, being hurt. He's now in custody, he's being interrogated.
The police were present at the press conference but did not give a statement or respond to questions. The Prime Minister, who did most of the talking, told journalists that Fray was being questioned. However, he did not say what specific charges the young man will face. As for the 159 Canadian passengers who suffered through this morning's ordeal, Mr. Golding said the Sandals chain has offered them a week's stay free of cost. The passengers, who were reportedly heading to 4 weddings in Cuba, were initially put up at their Holiday Inn in Montego Bay, then airlifted on another flight this afternoon. The Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who had just arrived in the island last night for a 2-day working visit, had nothing but kudos for the Jamaican authorities and the CanJet crew.
I just want to express all of our gratitude. I speak not just on behalf of the Canadian government, but I know all Canadians, for the safe release of all of the passengers and crew. I want to thank Prime Minister Golding for his personal involvement, his personal engagement in this. I know he and all of his people have spent a very long night, but right from the Prime Minister on down, the Jamaican authorities have demonstrated a competency and a professionalism.
He expressed gratitude for the outcome, saying it's rare that events like these end so well.
We all know from our experience in our own country, systems are not perfect. What matters is how one responds to challenges when one is confronted with them. And Jamaica has conducted itself today, to say from the Prime Minister on down, with professionalism and friendship.
Nadine McLeod reporting from the Western Bureau for TVJ News.
And the eyes of an anxious global community were on Jamaica for hours as the hostage situation played out in the Montego Bay airport late last night until dawn. Zoya Johnson was there for the entire incident and now fills us in on the chronology of events.
Emergency vehicles with flashing lights zipped past our news team, signaling that a crisis was unfolding somewhere in the second city. The seriousness and scope of the situation was soon revealed. A hostage situation was on the way at Sankster International, the bigger of Jamaica's 2 international airports. We rushed to the facility, where the police had begun cordoning the area and no one, other than emergency personnel, was being allowed onto the compound. And so our campout began. as anxious members of the public and the international media awoke to the news and began demanding answers. We soon learned that scores of passengers, along with crew members, were being held hostage on a CanJet flight with its final destination being Halifax, Canada. The airport was on lockdown, as the country's major security infrastructure was imported to Montego Bay to secure a violence-free outcome to the crisis. As information filtered, we learned that 21-year-old Stephen Frey had forced his way through the staff entrance at the airport about 10:30, brandished a firearm, then made his way onto the flight which had already been boarded. As the demand for information began pouring in from around the world, we further learned that all but 2 of the passengers had been released sometime after midnight. It was another 2 hours before the last 2 passengers were released, but the wait was nowhere near over, as 5 crew members, including the first officer, remained on board.
It's been a busy night here at the Sangster International Airport in Montego Bay, with events unfolding quite quickly. Officials have been able to successfully negotiate for the release of all the passengers.
The hijacker's father was called in to assist with the negotiations, but for 3 hours it was to no avail. 2 of the young man's closest friends were also sought, but with all of that, it was the decision by the security forces to counterattack which finally diffused the situation. Nearly 8 hours after the standoff began, the police team took Stephen by surprise and disarmed him. He was whisked away in an unmarked vehicle, while the tired crew members were escorted from the vessel. It was a moment of relief, not just to airport, government and tourism officials, but also to the scores of residents who spent the entire night outside the airport, waiting with bated breath for the ordeal to end. Latoya Johnson, TVJ News.
Meanwhile, officials at CanJet Airlines have lauded the Jamaican authorities for their handling of the hostage situation aboard Flight 918. The airline's Vice President Ken Woodside held a press conference in Canada after the situation was under control.
We're very pleased to confirm that the gunman on CanJet Flight 918 in Montego Bay is now in police custody, and the remaining crew have been released unharmed. Obviously, we are extremely concerned for the well-being of everyone involved in this incident. Our priority now is to provide comfort and support to the passengers and crew who were involved in this ordeal. The crew who were being held are receiving medical attention as a precaution.
Meanwhile, a passenger gave a description of what she saw when the police stormed the aircraft.
It was like watching Bad Boys 2. When the military came, the cops came, but the military, I've never seen nothing like that.
And security officials of Norman Manley
Bad boy.
security there in response to the threat at the other end of the island. Kirk Wright was at the Kingston airport as the situation unfolded in the west.
It seems like a typical day here at the Norman Manley International Airport in Kingston, miles away from where the CanJet plane was hijacked. But it's not quite business as usual. Civil aviation rules require immediate adjustments to security if ever a country feels its aviation system is under threat.
Once the threat level increases, then you increase your response concurrently.
The security head says the responses to any possible threat are usually predetermined.
In this particular situation, we increased our response based on a heightened threat level because at that time the perception was that there was no knowledge as to whether this was a simply one-off situation, part of a wider hostage in a terrorist type situation, or just the extent of it.
There are different threat levels in the aviation business. However, the security officials did not wish to say what level this morning's incident is now forcing Norman Manley to operate at. However, he says it's not likely the security changes will be in place for too long, as the authorities believe last night's hijack situation is a one-off incident.
I think at this stage of the game it would appear that we are dealing with a single person acting independently. Once we have assured ourselves in conjunction with the other agencies, our ministry, the police and their intelligence, etc., that is so, then we'll reduce to our normal threat level state.
We'll study what what transpired and determine what lessons we can learn from them to be implemented in our Jamaican airports. And no doubt the folks overseas will also be looking at what can be implemented in their own airports, because we're dealing with an international system here.
Kirk Wright, TVJ News.
Questions abound this evening about the 21-year-old young man who hijacked the plane. Keneal Gale tells us a little more about the man relatives and friends describe as troubled.
This once quite unassuming young man, according to his friends, had dreams of working in the world of aviation. They say he aspired to become a pilot all his life. But it wasn't his prowess in the cockpit which earned him the attention he so clearly desired. It was a crazy criminal act just before midnight on the evening of April 19, 2009. Those who know the 21-year-old saw it coming. Stephen Frey grew up in the community of Albion in St. James and was part of a middle-class family. His parents separated early in his childhood, and those who know him say that's when signs of trouble started. The separation of his parents reportedly did not go down well with Stephen, as he was shuffled around the homes of several family members. He attended the Mount Alvernia Prep School, then moved only a few meters away to the prominent Cornwall College, an all-boys school. The real problem started just over a year ago when family and friends say they noticed he had begun to act strangely. However, it was 3 months ago that a marked difference in his general behavior became apparent. This worried family members, and attempts were made to figure out the problem before it worsened. Friends report a bizarre incident just 1 week ago when they and Stephen were having fun at the popular Doctor's Cave beach. Appearing to be in a trance, Stephen reportedly walked past his friends and waded into the water. He appeared to ignore them as they spoke, then walked out of the water, picked up his clothes, and left the beach without a word to the people he had come with. But despite that strange incident, no one who knew him was prepared for what transpired last night. They huddled outside along with the many other bystanders, waiting and hoping that the situation would be diffused without bloodshed. Keneal Gale, TVJ News.
And there are varying degrees of concern from the tourism interests this evening to the major international incident in the country's biggest resort area. Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett says there is no immediate cause for major concern, while other leaders of the sector are bracing for a possible major fallout. Donald Christian reports.
Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett issued a statement this morning saying he was relieved that local security was able to secure the release of all passengers and crew aboard the aircraft. But the minister doesn't want to jump the gun as far as negative implications for the tourism sector are concerned. Mr. Bartlett is on a business trip in London, but in a telephone interview with TVJ News this afternoon, he said he's waiting to see how the tourism market responds to this morning's hijacking before making a statement on its impact. Mr. Bartlett said what is important is that the situation was handled professionally and that both Canadian and Jamaican Prime Ministers are pleased with the outcome. He argued that the man who allegedly hijacked the aircraft is of unsound mind and the incident could have happened anywhere. But hours after the hijacking, the president of the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, Wayne Cummings, was expecting the worst.
There is a feeling of insecurity for people who believe that they have people who want to spend their money to come to their destination. It's a paradox that we serve. We serve good images, we serve good news. And it's good news that we've been able to deliver on for most of the time. If this is the first time you are hearing about Jamaica, or you had money invested in a vacation with you, you start thinking to yourself, what's going to happen? So that's the kind of follow-up that I anticipate.
Mr. Cummings said he's annoyed. He said the incident happened at a time when the world is in recession and the tourism sector is already feeling the pinch. Mr. Cummings said after the investigation, heads should roll. But the JHTA president said in the midst of adversity, the country is able to turn the negativity into opportunity.
There's still a lot of negative information, a lot of international stations are still carrying front stage, breaking news, and we have a big job. That job now is finding a way to get that positive message out there.
Donald Christian, TVJ News.
And the opposition People's National Party is expressing a number of concerns in the wake of the hijacking. It wants a complete review of the security arrangements at the island's 2 international airports. TVJ News caught up with a shadow spokesman on national security outside Golden House. Janice Budd reports.
The opposition thinks it's time for the Golding administration to rethink how security is managed at Jamaica's international airports. Peter Bunting used the September 2001 terrorist attacks in the United States as an example. He said after 9/11, the U.S. introduced a specific police force for airports.
Well, there seems to be some amount of overlap in terms of the responsibility for security. We have police personnel, we have the Port Security Corps, I understand, we have private security firms employed by the airlines, and there seems to be some amount of overlap, and there may be some gaps in the system. I think, you know, we may want to look at the approach that the U.S. took after the whole 9/11 incident, where they created a special agency to deal with security at the airports.
The opposition spokesman thinks that may be a better option than the current arrangement under which the private companies which manage Jamaica's 2 international airports hire their own security firms. And though the local police force is already short about 4,000 officers, Peter Bunting argued that the Jamaican constabulary should have a greater role in the security of the international airports.
If instead of having to keep each batch at Twickenham Park for near 6 months, we could reduce that period to maybe 6 weeks, and the rest of the training we do outside of the police academy itself, and we contract out that training to private institutions who are already doing a good job and who may have spare capacity.
The opposition feels that should be part of an overall review of the current security arrangements, which he says is urgently needed given last night's events. Janice Budd, TVJ News.